The gunshot that killed Danny Preston echoed through the canyon long after his body hit the dusty ground. And when the marshal came to tell me 3 days later that my husband had died with a $2,000 bounty on his head, I knew my life in Riverside, California, was over before it had truly begun. I stood in the doorway of our modest cabin, the October sun beating down mercilessly even though it was 1878 and the year was winding toward winter. The marshal, a weathered man with gray in his mustache, shifted his weight from boot to boot as he delivered the news. Behind him, 2 other lawmen sat astride their horses, watching me with expressions that ranged from pity to suspicion. "Mrs. Preston," the marshal said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "your husband was involved in a stagecoach robbery outside of San Bernardino. He and his gang killed the driver and a passenger. When we caught up to them, he drew on my deputies." My hands gripped the doorframe so hard splinters dug into my palms. "That cannot be true. Danny worked at the lumber mill. He left 4 days ago to pick up supplies in town." The marshal's expression softened slightly. "Madam, I do not know what your husband told you, but Daniel Preston has been wanted in 3 counties for armed robbery and murder. We have been tracking him for 6 months. The world tilted sideways. I had been married to Danny for barely 8 months, having met him when he came through Riverside looking for work the previous winter. He had been charming and handsome, with dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and a way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We had married quickly, perhaps too quickly, but I had been 22 and alone after my father's death, and Danny had seemed like a fresh start. "What happens now?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, that depends," the marshal said slowly. "Did you know about his activities? Did you help him in any way?" "No," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I knew nothing. I thought he was an honest man." One of the deputies behind the marshal snorted, but the marshal shot him a quelling look. "The law will be coming around to ask questions, Mrs. Preston. They will want to search your property. If you are innocent as you claim, you should cooperate fully." "Of course," I said, though my mind was already racing ahead to all the complications this would bring. Even if I was cleared of wrongdoing, the stigma of being married to an outlaw would follow me everywhere. No respectable person in Riverside would want anything to do with me. I would lose my place in the community, such as it was. The marshal tipped his hat. "I am sorry for your loss, madam, even under these circumstances. A deputy will be by tomorrow to conduct the search." They rode away, leaving me standing in the doorway with the California sun burning the back of my neck and the world crumbling around me. I went inside and sat at the rough-hewn table Danny had built when we first moved in, and I let myself cry for the first time since my father's death. But these were not tears of grief for Danny, not really. They were tears of anger and betrayal, of realizing I had been a fool, of facing the terrifying uncertainty that stretched before me. The next day, a different lawman came to search the cabin. He was younger than the marshal, perhaps in his late 20s, with sandy brown hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He introduced himself as Deputy Owen Finnegan, and unlike the other lawmen, he treated me with a careful courtesy that made me wonder if he believed my claims of innocence or was simply better at hiding his suspicions. "Mrs. Preston," he said, removing his hat as he stood in my small parlor. "I need to search the premises. You are welcome to watch or wait outside, whichever you prefer." "I will watch," I said. "I have nothing to hide." He nodded and began his search methodically, checking under the bed, in the wardrobe, behind the stove. He was thorough but not destructive, setting things back where he found them with a care that surprised me. When he moved to Danny's trunk at the foot of our bed, I held my breath. I had not opened it since the marshal's visit, afraid of what I might find. Deputy Finnegan lifted the lid and began removing Danny's clothes, setting them aside neatly. At the bottom, wrapped in an old shirt, he found a leather pouch. He opened it and coins spilled out, far more money than a lumber mill worker should have had. His jaw tightened and he looked up at me. "Did you know this was here?" "No," I said honestly. "Danny kept that trunk locked. He said it contained his personal belongings from before we met, and I respected his privacy." The deputy studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, Mrs. Preston. But you need to understand that not everyone will. There are people in this town who will assume you were part of your husband's gang, or at the very least that you knew what he was doing." "I know," I said quietly. "I have already seen it in their eyes." He was silent as he finished his search, finding nothing else incriminating. When he was done, he stood in the center of the small cabin, turning his hat in his hands. "What will you do now?" "I do not know," I admitted. "I have a little money saved, enough for a few months if I am careful. But I doubt anyone in Riverside will hire me now, and I cannot afford to stay here without work." Deputy Finnegan frowned, and I could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "My family owns a ranch about 10 miles north of here. My mother passed 2 years ago, and my father is getting too old to manage the household on his own. We could use someone to help with cooking and cleaning. The pay would not be much, but it would include room and board." I stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Why would you help me?" "You do not know me." "Because everyone deserves a fair chance," he said simply. "You did not choose to marry an outlaw, Mrs. Preston. You were deceived, same as any victim. That does not mean you should be punished for his crimes." "There will be talk," I said. "People will say improper things about me living on your ranch." "Let them talk," he said with a shrug. "My father and I do not care much for gossip. We need help and you need work. It is a practical arrangement." I wanted to refuse on principle, to maintain what little pride I had left. But practicality won out over pride. I needed this chance, and Deputy Owen Finnegan was offering me something precious, a clean start. "I accept," I said. "Thank you. Good. Can you be ready to leave in 2 days? That will give you time to settle your affairs here." "Yes," I said. "I can be ready." He nodded and moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Preston, I should tell you that some of the men who rode with your husband are still at large. If any of them come around looking for you, you send word immediately. Do not try to handle them yourself." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you think they will come?" "I do not know," he said honestly. "But it is better to be cautious." After he left, I sat down and made a list of everything I needed to do. I would sell what furniture I could, pack what I could carry, and leave the rest behind. The cabin was rented, so I would inform the landlord I was leaving. I would say goodbye to the few people in Riverside who had shown me kindness, though I suspected those goodbyes would be awkward at best. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. The furniture sold for far less than it was worth, but I was grateful for anything. Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, bought my dishes and linens without asking questions, and I appreciated her quiet kindness. The landlord was less sympathetic, grumbling about having to find a new tenant, but he returned my deposit without argument when I pointed out I was leaving early. On the morning of the 3rd day, Deputy Finnegan arrived with a wagon. He helped me load my 2 trunks and a few boxes of personal belongings, then handed me up onto the seat beside him. As we rolled out of Riverside, I did not look back. There was nothing there for me anymore, except memories I would rather forget. The Finnegan Ranch was larger than I had expected, with a sprawling main house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and horses moved lazily in a corral near the barn. It was clear the ranch was prosperous, which made me wonder again why Owen Finnegan had bothered to help me. An older man emerged from the house as we pulled up, his face weathered by decades of California sun. He was tall and lean, with white hair and the same sharp blue eyes as his son. "This must be Mrs. Preston," he said, his voice deep and welcoming. "I am Silas Finnegan. Welcome to our home." "Thank you, Mr. Finnegan," I said as Owen helped me down from the wagon. "I appreciate the opportunity." "Owen tells me you are a hard worker," Silas said. "That is all we ask. Come, let me show you where you will be staying." He led me into the house, which was spacious and well built but showed signs of neglect that came from two men living alone. Dust covered most surfaces, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the whole place had an air of comfortable disorder. My room was on the ground floor, a small but clean space with a window overlooking the front yard and a bed covered with a faded quilt. "My wife made that quilt," Silas said softly, seeing me look at it. "She would have wanted someone to use it." "It is beautiful," I said, running my hand over the intricate stitching. "She must have been very talented." "She was," he agreed. "I miss her every day." Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine at the Finnegan Ranch. I woke before dawn to prepare breakfast for Silas and Owen, then spent the day cleaning, cooking, mending, and managing the household. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and I threw myself into it with a determination born of gratitude and a need to prove myself. Owen was gone most days, riding out early to patrol his territory and not returning until evening. When he was home, he was quiet and polite, treating me with the same careful courtesy he had shown from the beginning. Silas was more talkative, telling me stories about the early days of the ranch and asking gentle questions about my life. I told him about growing up in Missouri, about my father's work as a blacksmith, about coming to California after his death in search of a fresh start. I did not talk much about Danny, and neither of them pressed me for details. The few times Owen mentioned my late husband, it was only to assure me that the remaining members of his gang had been captured, and that I no longer needed to worry about them coming after me. I was grateful for that information, even as it stirred up complicated feelings about the man I had married. As autumn turned to winter, I began to feel something I had not felt in a long time: safe. The ranch was peaceful, the work was satisfying, and the Finnegans treated me with respect. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could build a new life here. It was December when everything changed. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Owen came home earlier than usual, his expression troubled. He found me stirring a pot of stew and stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Preston, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," I said, setting down my spoon and turning to face him. "Is something wrong?" He stepped into the kitchen and closed the door, which immediately made me nervous. "I heard some talk in town today. There are people saying that you and I are involved, that our arrangement here is not proper." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "I was afraid of that. What do you want me to do?" "Should I leave?" "No," he said quickly, then seemed to realize how forceful that sounded. "No, I do not want you to leave. You have done excellent work here and my father has grown very fond of you, but I have been thinking about a solution to this problem." "What kind of solution?" He took a deep breath, and I saw him square his shoulders as if preparing for something difficult. "We could get married. A marriage of convenience, purely practical. It would give you protection and respectability, and it would silence the gossips. We could maintain separate lives in all the ways that matter. You would just have my name and my protection." I stared at him, unable to process what he was suggesting. "You want to marry me to protect my reputation, and my father's," he said. "People respect him, and I do not want this gossip to tarnish his name. but mostly yes, to protect you. You deserve better than to be treated like a fallen woman when you have done nothing wrong. That is a large sacrifice to make for someone you barely know, I said carefully. It is not a sacrifice if it solves a problem for both of us, he countered. I have no interest in romance or marriage in the traditional sense. I am married to my work, but I do believe in justice, and it is not just that you should suffer for your first husband's crimes. I turned back to the stove, my mind spinning. It was a logical solution, I had to admit. As Owen's wife, I would have security and status. No one would dare question my respectability, but it also felt wrong somehow, like I would be trapping him in a loveless arrangement. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. But time was not something I had much of, as it turned out. 2 days later, the banker who held the mortgage on my father's old property in Missouri wrote to tell me that the land had been seized for unpaid taxes and that I owed a significant sum. It was money I did not have and could not hope to earn in any reasonable time frame. When I showed Owen the letter, his jaw tightened. "This is extortion," he said flatly. "Your father died 2 years ago. They should have sent notice long before now." I moved around a lot after his death, I admitted. The letter probably went to my old address. Still, the timing is suspicious. He looked at me seriously. "If you were my wife, I could help you settle this debt. As it stands, there is not much I can do." I understood what he was really saying. If I wanted his help, I needed to accept his proposal. It felt mercenary even thinking about it that way, but I also recognized the truth of my situation. I had no family, no resources, and now I had debts I could not pay. Owen's offer was the lifeline I needed. "All right," I said quietly. "I will marry you. But I want you to know that I will work to pay back any money you spend on my behalf. I do not want to be a burden." Something flickered in his eyes, though I could not quite read the expression. "You are not a burden, Mrs. Preston. You are a person who deserves help." We were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse in Riverside, with Silas as our witness. I wore a plain blue dress I had made myself, and Owen wore his Sunday best. The judge, an old friend of Silas's, performed the ceremony with warm efficiency. When Owen slipped a simple gold band on my finger, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and an unexpected flutter of something I could not quite name. Afterward, we returned to the ranch for a dinner Silas had prepared. It was a quiet celebration, the three of us sitting around the table as Silas toasted our marriage with elderberry wine. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Owen and I echoed. That night, I lay in my bed, the same bed I had been sleeping in since I arrived at the ranch, and stared at the ceiling. Nothing had really changed except that I was now Delilah Finnegan instead of Delilah Preston, and yet everything felt different. I had a husband again, though not in any traditional sense. I had security and protection, but at what cost? The winter months passed quietly. Owen continued his work as a deputy, often gone for days at a time tracking outlaws or transporting prisoners. I continued managing the household, and slowly but surely, I began to transform the ranch house. I cleaned every corner, organized every cupboard, sewed new curtains for the windows, and planted herbs in the kitchen garden. Silas watched my efforts with approval, often commenting that the house had not looked so good since his wife was alive. Owen and I maintained a polite distance, though I noticed small things about him that I had not paid attention to before. The way he always took off his boots at the door so as not to track mud through the house. The way he read the newspaper every morning with his coffee, his brow furrowed in concentration. The way he was unfailingly gentle with the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. In February, a late winter storm swept through the region, bringing heavy rains that turned the roads to mud and swelled the creek that ran through the Finnegan property. Owen had been gone for 3 days, tracking a horse thief toward the mountains, and as the storm worsened, I found myself increasingly worried. "He knows how to take care of himself," Silas said, seeing me pace by the window for the 100th time. "He has been doing this work for years." "I know," I said, "but the storm is so bad." "You care about him," Silas observed, and it was not a question. I turned to look at the older man, surprised by his directness. "He is my husband, in name," Silas said gently, "but I think it is becoming something more, at least for you." I wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat. When had I started caring about Owen as more than just the man who had given me a second chance? Was it when I noticed how tired he looked after long days of riding? Was it when I started looking forward to his return each evening, even though we barely spoke? Was it the way my heart had leapt when he had slipped that ring on my finger? "It does not matter," I said finally. "Our arrangement is what it is." "Arrangements can change," Silas said, "if both people want them to." But did Owen want things to change? I had no reason to think so. He had been nothing but consistent in treating our marriage as exactly what he had promised, a practical solution to a social problem. Owen returned the next day, soaked to the bone and exhausted. He had caught the horse thief and turned him over to the authorities in San Bernardino, then ridden through the storm to get home. I met him at the door with towels and hot coffee, scolding him for not waiting out the weather somewhere safe. "I wanted to get home," he said simply, and something in the way he looked at me when he said it made my breath catch. I helped him out of his wet coat and sent him to change while I heated water for a bath. When he emerged in dry clothes, his hair still damp, I had soup waiting and a fire blazing in the hearth. He sat down with a grateful sigh and ate in silence while I mended one of his shirts nearby. "Thank you," he said when he finished. "For this, for everything." "It is what I am here for," I said, keeping my eyes on my stitching. "No," he said, and his voice had an edge to it that made me look up. "It is more than that. You have made this house a home again. You have taken care of my father when I cannot be here. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never complain. I want you to know that I see it and I appreciate it. You gave me a chance when no one else would," I said softly. "I am the one who should be grateful. Can we not both be grateful?" He asked, and there was a hint of a smile on his face. "I suppose we can," I agreed, and found myself smiling back. Something shifted between us that night, though neither of us spoke of it directly. Owen started coming home earlier when he could, and we began taking walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his work, about the challenges of enforcing the law in a territory where justice was often rough and uncertain. I told him about my dreams of someday opening a dress shop, of creating beautiful things with my hands. "You should do it," he said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Open your shop, I mean. You have the talent for it." "Maybe someday," I said. "When I have saved enough money." "The money I paid to settle your debt," he said carefully. "I do not expect you to pay it back. That is not how a marriage works, even one like ours." "Our marriage is not like most," I pointed out. "No," he agreed, "but maybe it could be." I stopped walking and turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" He met my gaze, and I saw something vulnerable in his eyes that I had never seen before. "I mean that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement for me. I find myself thinking about you when I am away. I look forward to coming home not just because of the house, but because you are in it. I know this is not what we agreed to, and if you do not feel the same, I will understand. But I needed to tell you the truth." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Owen, you do not have to say anything now, he interrupted gently. Just think about it. I will not pressure you. Whatever you want our marriage to be, I will respect it. But I did not need time to think. Somewhere in the months of cooking his meals and mending his clothes and worrying about him when he was gone, I had fallen in love with Owen Finnegan. I had not meant to, had not even realized it was happening, but now that he had spoken, I could not deny the truth. I do not need to think about it, I said. I feel the same way. The relief and joy that flooded his face made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. He reached out and took my hand, and for the first time since our wedding day, he touched me with something more than polite courtesy. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and the careful way he asked, the way he gave me the choice, made me love him even more. "Yes," I whispered. He kissed me softly, tentatively, as if I were something precious that might break. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and let out a shaky breath. "I have wanted to do that for months," he admitted. "I wish you had," I said, and he laughed. That night, for the first time, I moved my things into Owen's room. Silas said nothing when he saw us come down for breakfast together the next morning, but the smile on his face said everything. Our marriage became real in every sense, and I discovered that the careful, serious Lawman I had married had a tender side he only showed in private. Spring came to the ranch with wildflowers and new calves, and with it came a sense of peace I had never known before. Owen continued his work as a deputy, but he made an effort to be home more, and when he was gone, I no longer worried quite so much. I expanded the kitchen garden, started sewing dresses for the women in town, and began to save money toward my dream of a shop. In May, Owen came home with news that made my blood run cold. One of Danny's old gang members had escaped from prison and was believed to be heading toward Riverside. "His name is Jack Morrow," Owen said, his voice tight. "He was Danny's closest friend. We have reason to believe he might come after you, either for revenge or because he thinks you know something about where Danny hid stolen money." "I do not know anything," I said, fear making my voice sharp. "Danny never told me anything about his crimes." "I know," Owen said, taking my hands in his, "but Morrow may not believe that. I want you to stay close to the ranch until we catch him. Promise me you will not go anywhere alone." "I promise," I said, though the idea of being hunted by one of Danny's former associates made my skin crawl. For a week, nothing happened. Then one afternoon, while Owen was in town and Silas was out checking on the cattle, a rider approached the house. I was in the kitchen when I heard the horse, and something in the deliberate slowness of its approach made me nervous. I went to the window and saw a man dismounting, his face hidden by the shadow of his hat brim. My instinct screamed danger. I grabbed the rifle Owen kept by the door and stepped out onto the porch, the weapon held steady in my hands. "That is far enough," I called out. "State your business." The man looked up, and I saw a hard, scarred face with cold eyes. "Well now, is that any way to greet an old friend?" "I am Jack Morrow. I believe you knew my partner, Delilah Preston." "I knew Danny," I said, keeping the rifle trained on him. "But you are no friend of mine. You need to leave." "Now I cannot do that," Morrow said, taking a step closer. "You see, Danny owed me money, a lot of money. And since he is dead, I figure his widow ought to pay his debts." "I do not have any money," I said. "And even if I did, I would not give it to you. Now get off this property before I shoot you." He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "You do not have the guts, little lady. Why do not you put that rifle down before someone gets hurt? The only person who is going to get hurt is you if you take another step," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He took another step, and I fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. He jumped back, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "Next one goes through your chest," I said coldly. Now get on your horse and ride away." For a long moment we stared at each other. Then he smiled, a cruel expression that made my blood run cold. "This is not over, Mrs. Preston. Or should I say Mrs. Finnegan? Yeah, I heard you got yourself a new husband, a lawman, no less. Danny would have had a good laugh at that." "My name is Finnegan," I said firmly, "and you need to leave before my husband gets back and arrests you." "I will go," Morrow said, mounting his horse. "But we will meet again. Count on it." He rode off, and I stood on the porch with the rifle until he disappeared from sight. Only then did I allow myself to shake. I went inside and locked all the doors, then sat down at the kitchen table to wait for Owen to come home. When he returned an hour later and I told him what had happened, his face went white with fury. "He came here, to our home." "I sent him away," I said, "but he said he would be back." Owen pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I will not let him hurt you. I swear it." He sent word to the other deputies, and within hours there was a manhunt underway. For 3 days, Owen barely slept, riding out before dawn and not returning until well after dark. I hated seeing him push himself so hard, but I understood his desperation to protect me. On the 4th day, they found Morrow hiding in an abandoned line shack in the mountains. He drew on the deputies, and Owen had no choice but to shoot him. When Owen came home that night, he looked exhausted and haunted. "Is he dead?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Owen said. "It is over." But I could see the toll it had taken on him. Owen believed deeply in justice and the law, and even though Morrow's death had been justified, it still weighed on him. I held him that night while he talked through what had happened, and I understood in a new way the burden he carried as a lawman. "You did what you had to do," I told him. "You protected innocent people, that is what matters." "I know," he said, "but it never gets easier." After Morrow's death, life slowly returned to normal. Summer arrived with blazing heat, and I threw myself into my sewing, taking on more and more commissions from the women in Riverside and neighboring towns. My reputation as a seamstress grew, and by August, I had enough money saved to seriously consider opening a shop. "There is a space available in town," Owen said one evening at dinner. "The old mercantile building on 2nd Street. The owner is willing to rent it cheap to the right tenant." I looked up from my plate, excitement and nervousness warring in my chest. "Do you really think I am ready?" "I know you are," he said firmly. "You have the skill, you have the clientele, and you have the determination. What more do you need?" "Courage," I admitted. "You have that too," Silas interjected. "You face down an armed outlaw with a rifle. Opening a shop should be easy by comparison." They both had a point. A week later, I signed the lease on the shop and began the work of setting it up. Owen helped me build shelving and display cases, and Silas contributed a beautiful hand-carved sign that read, "Finnegan's Fine Dressmaking." The day I opened my doors for business, I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I was meant to live. The shop was a success from the start. Women came from all over the county to have dresses made, and I hired a young seamstress named Lucy to help with the overflow of work. Owen was proud of me. I could see it in his eyes every time he stopped by the shop to check on me or walk me home at the end of the day. "You have done this all yourself," he said one evening as we strolled through town in the fading light. "You took everything that happened with Danny, all that pain and betrayal, and you turned it into something beautiful." "I could not have done it without you," I said. "You gave me the chance to start over. You believed in me when no one else did." "I believed in you because you are extraordinary," he said simply. "I saw that from the first day I met you." By October, nearly a year after Danny's death had turned my world upside down, I realized I was pregnant. I had suspected for a few weeks, but had been afraid to say anything, worried about Owen's reaction. We had never specifically talked about having children, and I did not know if he wanted them. I told him on a Saturday evening after dinner. Silas had gone to bed early and we were sitting on the porch watching the stars come out. "Owen, I need to tell you something," I said, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. He immediately looked concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," I said quickly. "At least, I hope nothing is wrong. I am going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed his usually serious expression. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," I said, relief flooding through me at his obvious joy. "In the spring, I think." He pulled me into his arms and held me close. "This is the best news. I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." "You want this?" I asked, needing to hear him say it. "Of course I want this," he said, pulling back to look at me. "I want everything with you, Delilah. A family, a future, all of it." The pregnancy was not easy. I suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as winter set in, I found the cold harder to bear than usual. But Owen was endlessly patient, bringing me ginger tea for the nausea and extra blankets for the cold. He insisted I close the shop temporarily and rest, though I resisted at first. "Your health and the baby's health are more important than any dress," he said firmly. "Lucy can handle the existing orders, and new customers can wait." Reluctantly, I agreed. I spent the winter months resting, reading, and preparing for the baby's arrival. Owen and Silas transformed the small room next to ours into a nursery, building a cradle and painting the walls a soft yellow. Silas's face glowed with anticipation. He was going to be a grandfather and he could not have been happier. "My Sarah always wanted grandchildren," he said one day as we sat in the parlor with me knitting tiny socks. "She would have loved this." "I wish I could have known her," I said. "She would have loved you," Silas said, "just as we do." The baby arrived in early April, a week before Easter. It was a long, difficult labor that left me exhausted but exhilarated. Owen stayed by my side the entire time, holding my hand and wiping my forehead with a cool cloth. When the midwife finally placed our son in my arms, I saw tears in Owen's eyes. "A boy," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" I asked. "What about Samuel?" Owen suggested. "After your father." I looked down at the small, perfect face of our child and felt tears slide down my cheeks. "Samuel Finnegan. It is perfect." Samuel was a good baby, content and healthy. I reopened the shop when he was 2 months old, bringing him with me and setting up a cradle in the back room where I could nurse him between customers. Owen came by every day during his lunch break to see us both, and Silas doted on his grandson with an affection that was beautiful to see. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt rich and full. I had my shop, my son, and a husband I loved more every day. Owen left the deputy position when Samuel was 6 months old, deciding he wanted to spend more time at home. He focused his energy on the ranch, expanding the cattle operation and building the business into something Samuel would inherit someday. 2 years after Samuel's birth, I found myself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and I worked in the shop almost until my labor began. Our daughter arrived in October, a tiny girl with dark hair and Owen's blue eyes. We named her Rose, and Samuel, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister. "Rosie," he would say, patting her head gently. "My Rosie." Life continued to unfold in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. The shop thrived, earning enough that I hired 2 more seamstresses. Owen and Silas grew the ranch until it was one of the most successful in the county. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses and following his father around the property. Rose was more cautious but had a stubborn streak that reminded me of myself. Silas passed away peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3. We buried him next to his beloved Sarah on a hillside overlooking the ranch. At the funeral, Owen stood with Samuel on one side and me on the other, Rose in my arms, and spoke about his father's legacy of kindness and integrity. "He taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing," Owen said. "He taught me to see people for who they are, not what others say about them. And he taught me that family is not just blood. It is who you choose to love and who chooses to love you back." I thought about that as we walked back to the house after the service. I thought about how Silas had accepted me when I had nowhere else to go. I thought about how Owen had given me a second chance at life and love. I thought about the family we had built together from the ashes of my first marriage. That night after the children were asleep, Owen and I sat on the porch as we had done countless times before. He held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" he asked. "If I had not offered you that job, if we had not married?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. I am too grateful for what we have." "I think about it," he said. "I think about how close I came to just doing the search and walking away, about how I almost did not make that offer because I thought you might find it insulting." "What made you do it?" I asked. "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. "There was something in your eyes that day, a strength, even in the middle of your despair. You had just found out your husband was an outlaw and a murderer, that your whole marriage had been a lie. Any other person might have fallen apart, but you stood there in that cabin and answered my questions with your head held high. I admired that. I wanted to help you, not out of pity, but because I recognized something in you that deserved protecting." "You saw me," I said softly. "Really saw me. Not as Danny's widow or as a victim, just as me." "Yes," he agreed, "and I have not stopped seeing you since." Years passed. Samuel grew into a young man who was as comfortable tracking cattle as he was working with numbers, showing an aptitude for both ranching and business. Rose discovered a talent for drawing and painting, turning one of the ranch's outbuildings into a studio where she spent hours capturing the California landscape on canvas. I eventually sold the dress shop to Lucy, who had become not just my employee but my friend. I was ready to spend more time at home, to focus on the ranch and my family. Owen and I grew old together, our love deepening with each passing year. We added a third child to our family when I was 38, a surprise baby boy we named Thomas, who became the light of our later years. One evening, when Samuel was 25 and about to marry a lovely young woman from San Bernardino, Rose was 23 and planning to open her own gallery in Los Angeles, and Thomas was 15 and full of energy. Owen and I took our familiar walk around the property. "Do you remember the day we met?" Owen asked as we paused at the fence line overlooking the valley. "Of course," I said. "You came to search my cabin and ended up changing my life." "We changed each other's lives," he corrected. "I was so focused on work before you. I thought that was enough, that duty and justice were all I needed. But you showed me that there is more to life than work. You taught me about joy and family and what it means to truly love someone." "You gave me everything," I said, emotion thick in my throat. "A home, a family, respect, love. You gave me myself back when I thought I had lost everything." "No," he said, turning to face me fully. "You did that yourself. I just recognized what was already there." We stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and pink that had witnessed so many of our conversations over the years. I thought about the girl I had been when I first came to Riverside, married to a man I did not really know, desperate and alone. I thought about the woman I had become, strong and confident, surrounded by love. Danny Preston had died with a bounty on his head, and in doing so, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift: freedom from a lie. Owen Finnegan, the cowboy lawman with a heart of gold, had given me something even more precious: a clean start and the love I had always deserved. Samuel's wedding was beautiful, held at the ranch on a perfect June day. Rose stood as a bridesmaid, her dress one I had made myself despite my retirement from the shop. Thomas served as a groomsman, looking so grown up in his suit that I cried. Owen walked beside me as we greeted guests, his hand warm and steady in mine. "Our boy is getting married," I whispered to him. "He is not a boy anymore," Owen said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "He is a man, and a good one." "He learned from the best," I said, squeezing his hand. The years that followed brought grandchildren, first 2 boys from Samuel and his wife Clara, then a daughter. Rose married a fellow artist and settled in San Francisco, visiting often and filling the house with stories of city life and the art world. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing the same dedication and integrity his father had always demonstrated. Owen and I settled into the comfortable rhythms of old age. We spent our days on the porch, watching the grandchildren play in the yard. We took slow walks around the property, remembering all the moments that had shaped our life together. We held hands at dinner and slept curled together at night, still as in love as we had been that first evening when he had admitted his feelings. One day, when I was 63 and Owen was 68, he came to me with a box I had never seen before. "I have been saving this," he said, sitting down beside me on the porch, waiting for the right moment. I opened the box and found letters, dozens of them, all in Owen's careful handwriting. "What are these?" "Letters I wrote to you over the years but never sent. I started writing them that first week after you came to the ranch, when I realized I was starting to care for you but thought I had no right to. I kept writing them all through our engagement and marriage and everything that came after. They are a record of my love for you, Delilah. Every thought, every feeling, every moment I looked at you and thought my heart might burst. I read through them with tears streaming down my face. There were letters from the early days, full of wonder and uncertainty. Letters from when Samuel was born, full of joy and fear. Letters from quiet Tuesday afternoons and dramatic Saturday nights. Letters that captured 30 years of love in ink and paper. "Why did you never send them?" I asked when I finished. "Because I was telling you in person," he said simply. Every day, in every action, I was trying to show you what these letters said. But I wanted you to have them anyway. I wanted you to know that there was never a single day when I did not love you with everything I had. I kissed him then, there on the porch where we had shared so many moments, where our life together had truly begun. "I have always known," I whispered against his lips. "You have shown me every single day." We celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the ranch house full of laughter and love. Thomas gave a toast, thanking us for building a legacy of integrity and love. Samuel spoke about the example we had set for him and his siblings. Rose read a poem she had written about love enduring through time and trial. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Owen and I lay in bed together. 35 years, he mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. "It is a lifetime," I said, "the best lifetime I could have imagined." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The way we started, the marriage of convenience that was not really a marriage at first." "Never," I said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. I needed you, you helped me, and somewhere along the way we fell in love. It is the greatest story I could have asked for." "Mine too," he agreed, pulling me closer. Owen passed away in his sleep when he was 72, his hand in mine. We had been lying in bed talking about the grandchildren when he simply closed his eyes and slipped away. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had simply given out after a life well lived. I knew the truth. His heart had given everything it had to give, pouring love into every corner of our life until there was nothing left. I buried him next to his parents on that hillside overlooking the ranch, the place where 4 generations of Finnegans had built their legacy. At the funeral, I spoke about the man who had seen a desperate widow and chosen to help. I talked about his integrity, his kindness, his unwavering commitment to doing right by people. I talked about how he had loved me, fully and completely, every single day of our marriage. Owen Finnegan gave me a clean start when I needed it most, I said to the assembled crowd. But more than that, he gave me a beautiful life. He taught me that love is not just romance and passion, though we had plenty of both. Love is also choosing someone every day, showing up when things are hard, and building something lasting together. He was the best man I ever knew, and I am grateful for every moment we had. I lived another 8 years after Owen's death, surrounded by family and filled with purpose. I watched more grandchildren arrive, 6 in total. I taught Rose's daughter to sew. I rode horses with Samuel's sons. I told Thomas stories about his father and grandfather, making sure the legacy of the Finnegan men was never forgotten. On a warm June evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about Delilah Preston, the handsome outlaw who had given me nothing but lies. I thought about the day he died and how I had believed my life was over. I thought about Owen Finnegan, the lawman with kind eyes who had offered me a job and eventually his heart. I thought about our first awkward conversations, our marriage of convenience, the moment everything changed between us. I thought about our children and grandchildren, about the ranch we had built together, about 35 years of love that had sustained me through his death and would sustain me until we were reunited. My life had been marked by 2 husbands, but only one had given me everything I needed. Danny had died with a bounty on his head, a criminal who had used me and lied to me. Owen had given me a clean start and shown me what real love looked like. He had seen me at my lowest and chosen to lift me up. He had married me out of duty and fallen in love with me completely. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude, for second chances and clean starts, for the cowboy lawman who had changed everything, for a love that had sustained me through every trial and joy, for the family we had built and the legacy we would leave behind. When I died peacefully in my sleep that night, surrounded by family, I went with a smile on my face and Owen's name on my lips. They buried me between Owen and Selah's on that hillside, overlooking the ranch that had been my salvation and my home. On my headstone, Thomas had inscribed the words Owen had written in the first letter he never sent, the one I had read through so many times the paper was worn soft. You deserved better than what you had been given, and I wanted to be the man who gave it to you. And he had. Owen Finnegan had been exactly that man, and I had been blessed beyond measure to love him and be loved by him in return. Our story had started with death and scandal, with a bounty and a desperate widow, but it had become something beautiful. It had become a testament to the power of second chances, of choosing to see the good in people, of love growing from the most unexpected places. The ranch continued for generations after we were gone, each generation telling the story of Owen and Delilah, of how a lawman had given a widow a clean start and found love in the process. It became a legend in Riverside, a reminder that even in the hard, unforgiving landscape of the Old West, kindness and love could flourish. And on quiet June evenings, when the sun set over the valley in shades of orange and pink, those who knew the story swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand along the fence line, still together even in eternity, still choosing each other every single day.